Under the glare of cameras, Jasmine Crockett corners Donald Trump, turning his silence into evidence. She maps the chain: extreme rhetoric, a culture of violence, secret directives, and finally the death of Charlie Kirk. The moment shocks America into unity and fear, as one question burns louder than any defense. How many more stay with us? This is a story worth every second of your time. The Capitol transformed into a battlefield of silence. An emergency hearing was called less than 24 hours after Charlie Kirk collapsed on stage, a bullet cutting short his rally and shaking the nation to its core. Inside the chamber, the air was thick, every breath heavy, as if the walls themselves knew history was about to be carved in stone. Reporters held their pens still. Cameras zoomed with surgical focus. Outside, the roar of thousands crashed against the marble. No more blood. No more blood. The chant was relentless, a drumbeat of anger and grief that no barricade could contain. Donald Trump sat in the hot seat, stiff-clutching papers that meant nothing now. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett rose, eyes cold as a blade, her stare locked on him with merciless precision. The chamber braced for the question that could shatter everything. Can a leader's words become bullets? The chamber pulsed with tension, the kind of tension that makes silence louder than any sound. Jasmine Crockett moved with the calm precision of a surgeon, her heels clicking once, twice, before she set down a single folded sheet of paper. No grand props, no theatrics, just a weapon of words. Her eyes locked on Donald Trump, unblinking, cold as steel, and then like a blade slicing through the still air, she spoke. You didn't pull the trigger, but did you create the climate where bullets fly? The words detonated in the chamber. A hush fell so heavy it felt suffocating. 6 seconds of silence dragged across the room like chains. The clock ticked. Cameras zoomed. Reporters froze. Trump's lips parted, then sealed again, his fingers clenching the papers in front of him. The silence was not hesitation. It was exposure, a spotlight revealing the cracks in his armor. Finally, he stumbled into words. I only speak the truth, he said, voice thin, brittle, nothing like the roaring rally tone. I only give people a voice. It was a plea, not a defense. The words sank instead of soaring, leaving behind only doubt. Crockett struck back without raising her voice. A voice can be oxygen, but it can also be poison. And yesterday it was poison. The line whipped across the chamber like gunfire. Senators flinched. Aides looked away. Trump's jaw tightened, but the damage was done. Then came the strike that shattered every shield. Crockett leaned closer, her tone steady, deliberate. In the military, commanders don't need to give the wrong order to be guilty. If they create the wrong conditions, if their men die under that climate, the responsibility still belongs to the commander. That is command responsibility. And Mr. Trump, that is exactly where you stand. The words hung in the air like a verdict, and then from beyond the stone walls, a roar erupted, thousands of voices pounding in unison. No more blood, no more blood. The chant shook the chamber, merging with her words, sealing the moment. Inside, Trump sat cornered, the weight of silence pressing harder than any accusation. Outside, the people had already delivered their judgment. The trial had begun, and Crockett had fired the first devastating shot. The silence after Crockett's first strike had not yet faded when she made her next move. Her hand lifted with calm certainty, and suddenly the screen behind her flickered to life. The room leaned forward as the video began to play. Grainy footage, but clear enough. Charlie Kirk on stage, rallying the crowd with fire in his eyes. And then the exact words rolled out of the speakers like an echo from Trump's own rallies. If they come for me, they come for you. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 7:14 p.m. The air shifted, the weight in the room pressing down harder. Crockett's finger stabbed toward the screen, and then the video cut. The next timestamp appeared, 7:16 p.m. The sharp sound of a gunshot pierced the chamber from the speakers. The footage froze on chaos, shouts, screams the moment Kirk's body collapsed on stage. Reporters gasped and some in the gallery covered their mouths. Crockett's voice landed like a hammer. 2 minutes. Signal and consequence. This is not coincidence. This is a chain. Your words traveled into the crowd's ears and ended with the gun. Trump lurched forward, his voice rising in defense, desperate to reclaim ground. That was just a slogan. Don't put this on me. Don't twist my words into something they're not. His tone carried the bravado of rallies, but here it rang hollow, bouncing off stone walls in heavy silence. His words no longer stirred cheers. They trembled like excuses. His aides shifted nervously beside him, scribbling useless notes, their eyes fixed on the floor as though hiding from the lens. Crockett's reply came sharp, clean, and merciless. She didn't raise her volume, but the precision in her tone sliced deeper than a shout. A slogan can be oxygen, but it can also be poison. And yesterday, it was poison. The chamber jolted as if struck. Her words were simple, but they detonated with the force of undeniable truth. Senators whispered behind raised hands. Some leaned back in their chairs, others hunched forward, struggling to absorb the moment. The press gallery exploded in frantic motion, keyboards, clattering pens, scratching, every journalist racing to capture the drama. The chamber was still reeling from the frozen image of Charlie Kirk when Jasmine Crockett struck again. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she reached for a different kind of weapon, numbers. Her hand lifted a sheet, and her words sliced through the tension with brutal clarity. In the last 5 years, America has recorded more than 360 incidents of political violence, and 70% of them are directly linked to rally speeches or campaigns tied to you, Mr. Trump. The words didn't float, they dropped like lead, undeniable and heavy. Lawmakers shifted in their seats and the gallery leaned forward, as though they'd just been hit with a blow no one saw coming. The figures were not abstract. Crockett's tone made them flesh and blood, every digit a reminder of shattered families and streets stained by conflict. She drove the point home with precision. This is not an accident. This is a climate, one carefully cultivated, one deliberately fed. A storm doesn't appear from nowhere. It grows because someone keeps seeding the clouds. Her hand tapped the sheet again, steady, relentless, like a gavel strike. She wasn't just speaking, she was indicting, building a case brick by brick. The murmurs grew louder among senators while the press gallery burst alive with furious typing reporters racing to immortalize the statistic that could no longer be dismissed. And then she pulled a document from her folder, its header visible even from a distance. She read aloud, her voice firm, every syllable carrying the weight of an institution beyond politics. An internal FBI assessment issued last year. Hate-filled rhetoric is no longer remaining as words. It is escalating into actions. The citation hit like a thunderclap. For the first time, it wasn't Crockett's opinion. It was the nation's top law enforcement agency drawing the line. She looked up, her gaze fixed on Trump, and repeated with precision, "Your words are not fading into air. They are mutating into bullets, bricks, and fists." Trump slammed a hand on the table, his voice rising to a furious roar. "That's the natural anger of the people. Don't put this on me. They're tired, they're ignored, they're fighting back. That's not my fault." His words echoed sharp and jagged, but they carried the desperation of a man cornered. Spittle hit the microphone as his voice cracked between rage and fear. His allies tried to nod, but the evidence on the table drowned every gesture. Crockett did not flinch. She leaned in, her tone colder now, her words slow and surgical. "No, that is not natural anger. That is anger you amplified. You turned grievance into a weapon. You didn't just speak it, you engineered it. You didn't just deliver a message, you operated the machine." Her voice cut deeper than any shout could, a steady indictment that stripped Trump's defense bare. The room was silent except for the furious clatter of reporters' keyboards. Every lawmaker, every spectator, every viewer watching at home knew the meaning was clear. The violence was not random. It was a system. And the man at the table had been the one to keep it running. The chamber was still vibrating from the FBI report when Crockett made her next move. She lifted a folder, her voice calm but sharp. "Statistics show the damage, but now we move to receipts. These are your own words written by your own team." She tapped the remote and the big screen behind her flickered to life. The email appeared in black and white, its header plain as daylight. Campaign Communications, August 12, 2023, 10:42 p.m. The subject line froze the room, amplify the fight. Below it, the message read, frame every issue as war we cannot lose. The words loomed over the chamber, each letter unavoidable. Reporters gasped. Senators leaned forward and aides buried their heads in their notes. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a record. The press gallery exploded, cameras flashing and keyboards clattering. Crockett stepped back from the screen, giving the country time to read the text with their own eyes. "Look at it," she said. "This is not off the cuff. This is not an accident. This is an order. Every issue, every grievance must be turned into war." Her voice was steady, but the impact was devastating. Then she clicked again. A second memo filled the screen, stamped and dated Strategy Memo, August 28, 2023, 11:47 p.m. The title glared in bold, Escalate the Fight. Beneath it, the directive, Calm is defeat. Escalate at every opportunity. The words were chilling in their simplicity, stripped of any disguise. The room erupted with whispers, lawmakers glancing at one another in disbelief. Crockett's tone sharpened. "This is not a slip of the tongue. This is a strategy. This is a machine designed to manufacture violence. These documents prove it, emails and memos from your own circle instructing your team to fuel division, to turn every spark into a blaze." She raised her hand, pointing at the screen. "You told them to amplify, to escalate, to make war the only frame America hears." And then, as if on cue, the crowd outside shifted its chant. Sarcastic, mocking, furious, they roared, "Amplify the fight! Amplify the fight!" The words rattled the windows, bouncing back into the chamber. The phrase meant to fire up. Supporters had turned into a weapon of shame, hurled back at its maker. Trump slammed his fist on the table, but the projection still burned above him. Amplify the fight, August 12, 2023, and escalate the fight, August 28, 2023. The evidence glared brighter than any denial. Crockett didn't need to say more. The emails spoke for themselves, a paper trail of deliberate provocation laid bare before the nation. The roar of Amplify the Fight from outside still echoed through the marble when Crockett reached for a single page sealed in her folder. Her tone lowered, steady and somber, pulling the chamber into a new kind of silence. "We have seen numbers. We have seen memos. But now we will hear the voice that matters most." She unfolded the letter and began to read, her eyes never leaving Trump. The words were simple, but they cut like glass. "My son believed in leaders he thought would protect him. He trusted words spoken from podiums. He repeated those words on stage, believing they gave him strength. But in the end, those words gave him no shield. My son is gone, and no one who claims to lead this country should ever dismiss the power of words again." Crockett's voice didn't crack, but the gallery did. Some spectators covered their mouths. Others bowed their heads. The chamber, moments earlier buzzing with outrage, now felt like a funeral. She lowered the page slowly and let the silence stretch. Then she drove the dagger home. "Mr. Trump, you call this a witch hunt. Then look into the eyes of a mother who buried her son and say that again." The challenge rang out with surgical precision. The cameras zoomed closer, catching every flicker of his expression. The gallery gasped, the reporters froze mid-keystroke. It was no longer just politics. It was grief, raw and undeniable, weaponized into truth. Trump's lips trembled. He leaned toward the microphone, but the bravado was gone. His voice came out thin, cracked, stripped of the force that once electrified stadiums. I never wanted this." The words barely carried past his own table. It was the tone of a man shrinking under the weight of something larger than him. His aides looked down, unable to rescue him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Crockett struck with the final blow, cold and deliberate. Wanting or not wanting doesn't matter. In law and in morality, creating the wrong conditions is still guilt. Responsibility is not optional. It is the price of power. Her words landed with the force of a verdict. No gavel could soften them. No slogan could erase them. The gallery stirred, some whispering prayers, others scribbling notes with trembling hands. The letter still lay on the desk before her, its lines echoing louder than any chant outside. The air in the chamber was heavy, as if even the walls understood the gravity of what had been read. Crockett's eyes locked on Trump once more. The silence didn't just belong to the room anymore. It belonged to the nation, watching in the stunned disbelief as grief became evidence, and evidence became judgment. The letter's echo had not faded when Jasmine Crockett stepped to the screen and uncapped a marker. "We moved from grief to structure," she said, drawing four stacked boxes the cameras could not miss. In the first, she wrote extreme rhetoric. In the second, culture of violence. In the third, internal directives. In the fourth, outcome, Charlie Kirk dead. She traced an arrow from the first box. "Words set the temperature," she said. "Say war enough times and people stop hearing debate." Her finger moved to the second box. "That heat becomes a culture threats at town halls, fists at rallies, intimidation seen as normal." She tapped the third box where the emails and memos had just been projected. "Then come the orders. Amplify the fight. Frame every issue as war we cannot lose. Calm is defeat. Escalate at every opportunity." Her hand landed on the fourth box. And this is where the chain ends. Crockett stepped back so the arrows filled the broadcast. "This is the path," she said, voice low but unshakable. "Extreme rhetoric feeds a culture of violence, which is then hardened by internal directives, which produces a result you now call tragedy." She faced Trump and leveled the blunt conclusion. "You knew the danger. You heard the warnings. But you chose escalation. That is not accidental. That is deliberate." The room held its breath. Even the chair did not reach for the gavel. Trump shifted toward the mic, but the screen behind him, four boxes, four arrows, made every denial smaller. Aides stared at their notes as if paper could swallow the moment. Crockett kept her eyes on him, steady and clinical. "This is not theater," she said. "It is a system you operated, message, mood mandate, mortality." Murmurs rippled across the dais. The press gallery erupted in keystrokes like rain on a tin roof. Phones lit up nationwide as producers slammed out banners. Push alerts flashed the same line within seconds. "Crockett accuses Trump of operating a deliberate violence machine." Cable chyrons mirrored it, the four-box graphic taking over split screens from coast to coast. Inside the chamber, senators leaned forward to study the arrows as if seeing the wiring behind a fire for the first time. Crockett did not add flourish. She let the diagram do the talking. The chain stood on the wall, simple, brutal, complete. The four-box diagram was still blazing across TV screens when the streets began to glow with firelight that didn't burn. From Boston to Phoenix, candles lifted like a second sky, front porches, courthouse steps, union halls, school parking lots. Crowds filled the sidewalks in heavy, respectful silence, then rose into a steady murmur that sounded like a heartbeat. In city after city, phones lit up with the same vigil flyer and the same three words, "No more blood." The nation's grief moved from screens to pavement, from headlines to hands cupping tiny flames against the wind. They came in work boots, faded varsity jackets, church coats, veterans, steelworkers, teachers, men with silver at their temples and lines carved by hard years. At a courthouse lawn, a Marine with a stiff back faced a local camera and spoke for the row of quiet men around him. "We serve to keep the country steady, not to hear leaders incite Americans against each other." A steelworker nodded beside him, palms blackened by a lifetime of heat, and added nothing. The look on his face said enough. A math teacher held his candle high and called roll for the fallen voice breaking on the final name. The chant returned low and relentless. "No more blood." Newsrooms caught the wave and gave it a name before midnight. Banners rolled across cable like air raid sirens. "Watergate of the new era." Editorials framed the day as a line in the nation's ledger, before the diagram, after the diagram. Anchors replayed the four boxes in the arrows: extreme rhetoric, culture of violence, internal directives. Outcome as if they were reading a black box after a crash. Front pages locked it in a candlelit map of America, the headlines stamped across the glow. Commentators stopped speaking in horse race verbs and reached for history's nouns. Then the tremors hit the building that had once felt immovable. Trusted allies went quiet, no morning hits, no primetime defenses, phones set to voicemail. A scheduled joint appearance vanished from a senator's calendar without explanation. A longtime surrogate posted a single sentence about prayers for the family and nothing else. Behind closed doors, aides whispered about stepping back and letting this cool, but the word calm sounded radioactive now. The distance wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Reputations took a step away from the blast zone. Out on the boulevards, the vigils held their ground. Candles dripped onto cardboard wax, hardening into small white borders around hand-drawn names. A father lifted his grandson so the boy could see the sea of lights. The child whispered the chant as if learning a pledge. The wind pushed and the flames bent but did not go out. Across the plazas, 1,000 phones rose to capture the same frame: steady hands, steady fire, steady voices refusing heat for heat. And in that quiet firmness, the country measured the crack in a legacy, in the weight of a phrase it would not forget: Watergate of the new era. From the candlelit streets, the fight moved to studio lights. News anchors swapped soft empathy for hard analysis, rolling the four-box graphic while a quiet verdict took shape. The line you heard again and again was blunt: Trump did not issue an order, but he built the climate. They replayed the timeline, the chants, the memos, and then drew the conclusion in plain English so no one could miss it. A leader can make violence likely without ever saying the word shoot. A leader, they said, can turn temperature into consequence. Round tables filled with historians, criminologists, and risk experts who rarely agree on anything, and yet they converged on the same frame. Intent matters, they said, but so does foreseeable outcome when you keep feeding the same fire. When language defines politics as war, crowds begin to behave like they're on a battlefield. Scholars pointed to decades of research on signaling priming and crowd contagion, translating footnotes into words any viewer could follow. You don't need a direct command if the drumbeat is constant, one historian said on air. If the music never stops, the march continues. Then a term left the seminar room and entered the living room: command responsibility. Producers put it in big letters and asked for a definition a grandfather could explain to a grandson. A retired JAG officer spelled it out: when a commander creates or tolerates conditions that predictably lead to harm, the commander is accountable for the harm. It was the opposite of hair splitting. It was the simplest rule soldiers learn: own the field you shape. If you set the stage, you share the bill, another analyst said, and the phones in the control room lit up. To make it land, guests drew lines from uniforms to everyday life. A factory foreman who shrugs at safety rails cannot wash his hands when someone falls. A fire chief who jokes about codes does not get to plead surprise when the block burns. In sports, a coach who teaches cheap shots owns the broken bones that follow. Law professors kept the jargon outside and used short phrases: negligent, climate reckless, signaling, foreseeable harm. The point was not poetry. The point was clarity. Then came the moment that cut through the noise. A retired four-star general sat under primetime lights, medals tucked away, voice steady as a range command. He didn't speak in law or politics. He spoke in command verbs learned the hard way. The one who holds the microphone holds responsibility. You cannot say, "I was only joking," and wash your hands. The sentence landed with the dull weight of a field manual slammed on a desk. He paused, let the words breathe, and added nothing else because nothing else was needed. Other veterans followed: sergeants, captains, medics calling in from VFW halls and kitchen tables. They weren't arguing the First Amendment, they were arguing duty. "We were taught to cool down a hot room, not heat it up," one former platoon leader said. "You don't lace your men's boots with gasoline and then blame the match." Their plain speech turned theory into muscle memory, and you could feel the audience nod along. It sounded less like a debate and more like a briefing. Not everyone agreed, and the shows made room for that too. Surrogates said no one can control millions of people, that anger belongs to the angry, that slogans are not instructions. Free speech advocates warned against punishing rhetoric, and civil libertarians asked where the line would be drawn. But even in pushback, the frame held: climate versus command likelihood versus literal order outcome versus shrug. The crawl at the bottom of the screen kept repeating the same four words from outside the Capitol. How many more? The question leapt from cable to print, from op-ed to podcast, because it was short enough to fit on a hat and heavy enough to bend a headline. Editorial boards that rarely share a headline shared that one, stamped across candlelit front pages like a national watermark. Sports radio hosts read it between scores, and morning DJs paired it with traffic updates as if it were a public safety notice. In union halls, a steward taped the phrase over the time clock. In school lounges, a teacher wrote it above the lesson plan. The grammar of the country turned into a single interrogative. Producers hunting for balance aired clips of town halls where the divide showed up in faces rather than polls. One side said leaders should not be blamed for lunatics. The other side pointed to the memos in the drumbeat and asked what anyone expected. Pastors preached about tongues as sparks. Therapists talked about de-escalation. Emergency room doctors described Saturday nights that felt like war zones. The best segments didn't shout. They diagrammed the way Crockett did and left the viewer to trace the arrows. At the end of each block, the host returned to the same closing line. How many more university panels streamed late into the night, translating command responsibility into civics homework? Students heard comparisons to ship captains, mine supervisors, airline chiefs roles where culture determines risk long before any single mistake. A maritime lawyer explained how a captain's tone in rough water changes what crews attempt and what they refuse. A flight instructor said checklists exist precisely to cool the human tendency to escalate. The dots connected in simple pictures, not dense citations. Meanwhile, talk shows stitch the day's pieces into one fabric: extreme rhetoric, a normalized culture, internal directives, and a human cost with a name. They weren't calling it guilt in a courtroom sense. They were calling it ownership in a leadership sense. This is the junction where law meets duty, a constitutional scholar said. You can be legal and still be wrong. You can be careful with words and careless with outcomes. Viewers who had tuned in for heat were getting light, and many stayed. By night's end, the national split had not healed. If anything, it was drawn with clearer ink. But the center of gravity had moved from whether a sentence contained an order to whether a season contained a signal. The debate stopped chasing one clip and started measuring a climate. And across all of it, under the scrolls above the panels, behind the candles, 4 words kept their beat. How many more? The televised debates, the leaked memos, the chants from the streets, all of it built toward a single moment. Crockett rose for what everyone sensed would be her closing strike. The chamber hushed, and she did not waste words. Her gaze swept the room, the cameras, and then locked on Trump. We cannot call this political theater, she declared, her tone sharp as steel. This is life and death signaling. Every sentence, every slogan is not just sound, it is a signal. And signals can heal or they can kill. The silence that followed was electric, a silence heavy with recognition that this was no longer about one man, but about the language of power itself. She laid out the lessons steady and direct, as if etching them into stone. Lesson 1. Words are signals. They can save. They can destroy. They can build a bridge or load a gun. Yesterday we saw which path your words took. She let the line linger, each syllable hanging in the still air. Some in the gallery nodded. Others lowered their eyes, the truth too sharp to deny. Reporters typed furiously already, knowing the quote would lead every front page by morning. Her hand pressed on the desk as she leaned closer, voice cutting sharper. Lesson 2. Power equals responsibility. If leaders dodge, it is the people who bleed. If leaders shrug, it is families who bury their sons. Power without responsibility is not leadership, it is abandonment. And America will not survive abandonment. She delivered the lines not as rhetoric, but as verdict, her cadence steady as the beat of a drum. The senators sat stiff, their eyes darting between her and the man slumped in the witness chair. Then she turned to the third lesson, her tone rising, filled with the weight of history. Lesson 3. The people must hold the line. They cannot allow the spiral of violence to keep turning. Because when leaders feed division, only the people can break the chain. If citizens refuse, the spiral ends. If citizens surrender, the spiral consumes them. The words carried like a warning bell, not just to the chamber, but to the millions watching in living rooms across the nation. Outside, chants swelled again, faint but relentless, echoing through the stone walls. She paused, then invoked the shadows of history, driving the point deeper. Richard Nixon kept an enemies list. Joseph McCarthy hunted phantoms in a witch hunt. Ronald Reagan joked about nuclear bombs. History judged them all not for their excuses, but for their words. And history is watching again. Her voice cracked like thunder in the chamber, drawing gasps as if she had pulled ghosts into the room to stand behind her. The lesson was not academic, it was an indictment written across decades. The final strokes landed with the gravity of a funeral bell. Crockett lowered her voice to a near whisper, forcing the room to lean in. Mr. Trump, history will not weigh your intentions. It will weigh the lives lost under your climate. You can call this unfair. You can call this partisan. But mothers do not bury excuses. They bury sons. She closed the folder and stepped back, the strike complete. For a moment the chamber was a tomb, everyone trapped inside the echo of her words. Then the cameras cut outside, and America saw what had grown while the hearing unfolded. The streets were alive with tens of thousands of candles stretching in waves down avenues and across courthouse lawns. Fathers lifted children to see the lights, veterans stood with steady salutes, teachers held signs above their heads. The chant swelled, rolling like a tide over the city for the mothers, for democracy. The words rose from grief into defiance, from defiance into resolve, a national chorus refusing to be silenced. The broadcast returned to the chamber only for the narrator's voice to rise over the images, calm, yet carrying the weight of judgment. If leaders dodge, the people will fall. If words inflame, democracy will burn. But if the people stand together, the truth will survive. The screen froze on the sea of candles, their glow painting the night with defiance. The chant grew louder still. For the mothers, for democracy, until it was no longer just a cry, but a vow echoing from city to city, a promise carried into the future. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.